Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
So you have time built into your schedule to see patients. Obviously, if you're a dental office, you have to have a schedule where you're performing clinical procedures. And hopefully, you have time built into your schedule for treatment presentations. I talked about that all the way back in episode 1. You're not going to have much to produce if you don't have time to actually present treatment. So you have time built in for clinical and hopefully time built in for sales. But have you built management time into your schedule? If you're like the average office, you haven't. And that's a problem because if you don't have management time built in, you have no mechanism to make sure that your office is attaining its long-term goals. And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode of Dental Business RX. Specifically, I want to give you a simple format for a weekly doctor and office manager meeting so that you guys can make sure that you're pulling off what it is that you've intended. My name is Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host. And I think I'm going to just jump right into this. The idea of a weekly doctor office manager meeting. Now, the first question when I bring this up to a newer client is, why am I doing this on a weekly basis? Shouldn't I be doing this monthly or quarterly or yearly? Sure, you can meet annually, and that might be a bit of a bigger meeting where you lay out your annual goals, and you can also meet quarterly. There's nothing wrong with those benchmarks. How did we do this quarter? How did we do this month? But the reason we recommend that you get together on a weekly basis is because management very often is done when, when you have time, the time presents itself, which is usually never, or something is going very wrong. If you're meeting weekly, you're staying on top of what's going on in the office, and using that shorter time period allows you to catch problems before they become really big. For instance, one of the things you'll see as I get into this format is you'll be going over statistics. Well, if you have a goal, let's say for the month to do $100,000 and you're not meeting weekly, let's say maybe you talk on the 23rd, you happen to catch your office manager before he or she leaves for the day. And you want to see where things at for the month. And you find out the goal was 100,000 and you find out that you're at 45. What's the 23rd? You have very little time to rectify this situation. Had you been meeting weekly, you would have known that after week 1, the office was only at 15,000. And then you might have taken action to actually fix things that might have then redirected your course so that you ended up doing 100. It's a small enough time unit to stay on top of what's going on in the office. So, how would we do this weekly meeting? Because again, you can do quarterly, you can do annual. I definitely recommend an annual meeting and quarterly meeting are great. You can even do monthly if you feel like it. But how would we run this weekly meeting? I want to give you a basic format. We have clients who listen to this podcast that maybe have finished the MGE Power Program. They may have a more complex weekly meeting setup. But, I might also have somebody, this is the first podcast you're listening to. I hope you like it. So I'm going to keep this real simple. And this is something that you can take right after you've listened to this episode and start using in your office right away. So let's look at our basic format for a weekly doctor office manager meeting. The first thing you have to do is have a schedule for it. It should happen at the same time every week, week in and week out. The only thing that should in any way change it is if there's a holiday or you're not in the office, but it should be the same time. And this is just a funny thing about meetings in general. And this is just an implementation issue, actually, if you want to look at it like anything else. Usually, one of the biggest problems that prevent implementation is lack of follow-through. So let's say you decide you want to implement a new referral program in your practice. Maybe you're giving out cards for patients to give to their friends. So you tell your staff about it. You're really excited about it. You bring it up at a staff meeting. You show everybody, these are the cards and we should give them out to patients. And then maybe people do it a little bit that week. And then maybe at your next staff meeting, you bring it up. Maybe it's not going in as well as you'd like. And then by the next staff meeting, life has taken over and you've forgotten all about it. And then, 6 or 7 months later, you find a couple of the cards in your desk and you wonder, wonder whatever happened with that, or it didn't work. Well, the problem wasn't that it didn't work. It's that nobody actually followed through to make sure that it was actually getting done on a routine basis. And this is how most things work in organization. In order to implement something new, it has to be continuously reinforced. If you're going to start a meeting, let's say you wanted to do a morning huddle, for example, it should be at the same time every day, without fail. Maybe you have them different times and different days, but it never changes. It's always at that time. And if you do that often and long enough, it becomes weirder for the team to not have the meeting than to have the meeting, if that makes any sense. In other words, if you've only done it 3 times and then you don't do it on day 4 and then you don't do it on day 5, then you try to do it on day 6, it's still in that kind of weird new phase. Whereas if you did it every day, just day in, day out, day in, day out, and then, after 6 months, you decide one day you're not having the meeting, you'll find people just sort of show up in your office or wherever you do the meeting expecting this meeting to happen because you've made it such an established part of your practice. So you want to do that same thing with this Dr. OM meeting. You want to have it at the same time every week. You should take a half hour to an hour every week. And this is when you're doing it. And this is your management time. I mean, sure, you're taking action items from this meeting and you're doing them throughout the week, but this is the time you're deciding how the ship is going to be steered or if you need to make any course corrections. So what are the 4 basic things we're going to go over in this meeting? Real simple. We're going to go over office statistics. We're going to go over the next 2 weeks of schedule as it relates to the month. We're going to go over financial and personnel issues, and we're going to go over marketing, new patient marketing as well as patient marketing. So let's pick up each of these points, and I'll sort of give you the flavor of how this might work. And look, you don't have to be an expert at this to make this work. Just start it. Start working with it. As you work through it and as you gain more knowledge, this will become more efficient. But it's almost like you're better off doing something rather than nothing in this case. If you just start having the meeting, maybe it's not the best meeting you ever had, you'll find that things start to improve in the office. Remember to keep it regular. So when we talk about statistics, you're keeping a running record of what's going on productivity-wise in your practice. And, we've heard this term before, managing by statistics. We teach it here at MGE. As a matter of fact, the average MGE power client will spend 11 days training on the subject. There's a lot to know about statistics. Some people think that statistic management is just simply graphing them. It's a lot more than that. It's what do you do when you see the graph doing a certain thing or behaving a certain way. But in any event, you want to work out your statistics. You want to keep your statistics and represent them graphically like a line on a weekly basis. So you've got several weeks and you can see whether this line is, heading up or it's heading down. And running your office without statistics is sort of like trying to drive your car with all the instrumentation in the trunk. How fast are you going? I don't know. How much gas do I have? Who knows? What's the oil temperature? Who knows? Right? So this is what tells you, is the practice doing well or is it doing poorly? And I'm going to give you a couple basic stats to keep. There's the usual ones we know. There's production, collection, and new patients. Those we know, and you're keeping these weekly. How many did we do this past week versus last week versus the week before? And then there's 3 additional ones that I'd recommend that you keep on a weekly basis. One would be treatment plans accepted versus presented or dollar value. So if you presented, $100,000 worth of treatment and $20,000 was accepted, you'd have that represented on the graph. And you'd have new patient calls and recall patients. So let me fill you in on these a little bit. We've talked about some of these on other episodes, but these are important metrics to keep in the practice. And we actually had an episode on metrics not that long ago where we get into these a little bit more, but I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. So treatment plans accepted and presented are pretty obvious. If I present a $10,000 case and a patient decides to do 2,000 of it now, that's 10,000 presented versus 2,000 accepted. Now, what does accepted mean? Accepted means they're doing it now. If you present 6 crowns and a patient accepts 2 right now, they're going to do what insurance covers, but says they're going to do the other 2 next year and the other 2 the year after. They did not accept all 6. They accepted 2 because you don't know for a fact they're going to do the other 2 next year. And very often you'll come to a patient the year later, and we've all heard this before, where you go, okay, ready to do those other 2 crowns. I thought we did those last year, right? Yeah, we know how it goes. But it's what are they doing now? That's treatment plans presented and accepted. New patient calls would be any type of contact to your office as a prospective new patient. Now, this also includes shopper calls. If I call your office and say, hi, how much do you charge for a crown? And I give you my name and number and tell you I'm looking for a dentist, that's a new patient call. Whether you converted me or not is a whole other story, which we've talked about in other episodes. I would definitely recommend that you have a call log so you can track these calls, because if you don't know if your marketing is working or not, because all your marketing is going to do is create a phone call, and you might have a conversion problem, meaning your receptionist isn't converting these patients. And the last statistic I'd keep on a weekly basis is recall appointments, not hygiene appointments, but recall appointments. Now, why? This is a key practice growth statistic, because if you take a look at it, if you're that is a statistic that should always be going up over time because you're adding new patients. This statistic tells you whether you're actually retaining them or not. These are patients coming in for a 6-month, 4-month, even a 3-month recall or perio maintenance. In other words, they're coming in for a regular quote unquote checkup. This tells us, is the practice growing or is it shrinking? Am I adding a day of hygiene a year or are we staying the same? Or is hygiene getting harder to fill and I'm barely able to keep three days filled? This is your growth stat. So those are the main 6 statistics you can start keeping. Now, obviously, more advanced MGE clients are going to do more than this, but this is just, we're staying basic right now, right? So you keep these stats, and what are you going to do? So you've graphed them, you have them, you're looking at them with your office manager, you're looking at, are they going up? Are they going down? Is there anything we need to do in order to course correct here, especially with relation to long-term goals? So if you've set a goal for the practice to do, 1.2 million this year or roughly 100 a month, and you see that, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and you see that collections are only at 20 in week 2, you have to do something quick to resolve this, and it also will spur some action items to dig into why. Why are we only at 20? What's going on? What does the schedule look like? What's happening? And from doing that, it will spur action and you'll be able to actually bring about a little bit of a change in these areas. Now, obviously, this is where executive training comes in and education on the subject. This is the types of things that we here at MGE do. But minimally, and I've seen this before, if I have an employee start keeping their statistic, that in and of itself, believe it or not, even if they just have a graph at their desk, and obviously, if they're working with the public, I would have it at a public view. But just having a graph at their desk almost makes it go up because they don't want that to go down. It's just a funny thing. People want it to go up. The average person's a pretty good person. They want to show that they're performing better and better. So if you're just looking at these things, you're taking a look at areas that are underperforming, areas that are performing well, then you can figure out action items to take to course correct when need be. So that's the first thing you're going to do with your OM. And then you're going to have a little series of action items for each of these points on what you guys are going to work on in the week to come. What would we take a look at next? And this all relates back to statistics. You'll see as we go through it. The next thing we're going to look at is the next 2 weeks of schedule, especially as it relates to the month. So now, obviously, if it's the last week of the month, we're still looking at the next 2 weeks, but the month is going to end in a week. But we're looking at the next 2 weeks of schedule. Why? Any scheduler will tell you that the longer you have to fix something in the schedule, the easier it is. So if you have an appointment cancel today, that's a lot more difficult to fix than an appointment that canceled 2 days from now. So if we're looking at next week's schedule and the week after, that's where you're going to see that you as the doctor have a 2-hour opening in primary time on Thursday morning. Or even the week after, your Monday morning is completely empty. Well, now that gets you thinking. These are little action items you can keep track of. When you're presenting treatment throughout the next few days, at that point, you can go, I could see if we can get it into this slot here. Okay, this is a case that would fit perfectly here. It coordinates the office a little bit better and it gets everybody on the same page. So you and the OM are looking at this to make sure that your next 2 weeks are solid and that they are meeting the levels they need to be at in order to achieve your goal. What's the next thing we're going to pick up? Financial and personnel matters. So you'll have staff asking for raises or, you might have a staff member moving out of town or a staff member that's underperforming. Well, this is where you're going to address those issues. Your hygienist wants a raise. This is where you review it, and then you can let them know the following week whether they got it or not. Your scheduler is moving in a month. This is where you can figure out what you need to do in order to replace them. Or maybe your dental assistant is underperforming and you need to replace them. Or you need to hire a new employee because you're so busy. This is where you and your office manager will discuss these issues and develop action items based on what comes up. Okay, we need to call this person. We need to do this. We need to place an ad. These are where we're going to be taking a look at these things. Otherwise, again, this is why we're having a meeting. If you coordinate early in the week and you figure all these things out, then it's just a matter of during the week checking with each other to see how you're progressing. If you don't ever coordinate these things, it's whenever you get a second to talk about it. So it's important that you sit down and you do it. So you're taking a look at any other things that you have to cover. There might also be some new equipment you want to buy or some other financial issues affecting the practice that you would then discuss with your office manager at this point. So it's point 3. Then point 4 is marketing. Now, again, this is going to relate back to our new patient statistic, but this is where we do a little bit of a deeper dive on our marketing. So let's say, you're doing 4 different types of marketing in the practice. You're doing postcards, a newsletter, Facebook ads, and Google ads. All right. Well, this is where you would take a look at, well, how many calls are we getting off of these? How many conversions did we get? You'd have your new patient log and you'd take a look at what marketing is working and what is not. So that you're not waiting until it's completely failing before you change something and course correct, right? I know I say that word a lot here, but that's essentially what we're talking about doing. So if I take a look at my 4 things I'm doing for marketing with my office manager, and it also helps to work with somebody else, and I'm looking, I go, okay, this one's doing well, this one's doing well. Google pay-per-click isn't doing so well. So we take a look and we see that, we've been running the same ads for a few weeks. And after a time, ads start to lose their effectiveness. It just happens. So then we know we need to juice up these ads a little bit to make sure that, that we can increase our responses again. This is where we're confronting these things on a weekly basis. So then we wrap it up. We make an action item list of what we're going to get done this coming week. Maybe 5 minutes every morning. We check in with each other to see how we're doing. And then we can kind of compare notes when we have the meeting next week. And if we're doing these things that we've been wanting to do to manage the office, not just handle the day-to-day traffic and see patients and present treatment and whatnot, but the things we've been wanting to do to make sure that we're achieving our long-term goals are actually coming off. So I wanted to keep it simple. I hope that helps. This is something you can start doing right away. And if you have any questions, you can always call us here at MGE at 800-640-1140 or visit us online at mgeonline.com. You can also visit the podcast website, which is dentalbusinessrx.com if you want to leave any feedback or comments. Otherwise, folks, I hope you do great, and I'll see you at the next episode.